discussion. At the same time, the year 2022 marks the 17th anniversary of Greece's membership to the Alliance. This coincidence provides the opportunity to discuss Greece's role, Greece's standing as a member of the Alliance, and its strategic imperatives in the region. So, aiming to make a rather minor contribution to these challenges, the Institute of International Relations, which is already a generation old, is launching a new annual event, the Athens Security Forum, whose ambition is to provide the main platform of security dialogue in Greece, both academic and policy-oriented. The first edition of the Athens Security Forum includes a series of 4 events, the first 3 online, while the fourth in a hybrid format between March and September 2022. The first one, today's event, is about the new strategic concepts and the new challenges for international security. The second event, in a month's time, it's about NATO and the EU. It's a comparative, if you like, approach of this strategic concepts and the strategic compass that was just out, and the future of the transatlantic community. The third is about hopefully the aftermath of the Ukraine war and the reshaping of the European security sometime in May. And the final event of 2022 is about NATO and Greece as a factor of stability in Eastern Mediterranean, the 70 years of the relationship in September. So through these planned events, it participates in the dialogue to further exploit the possibilities provided by the existing tools and processes within NATO and the European Union. Let me conclude this brief opening remark by thanking our sponsors. First and foremost, NATO. NATO has been very generous and we are grateful for the trust bestowed upon us to kickstart the debate. Second, the legendary Harriman Institute of Columbia University. They've been also partners without any reservation right from the beginning of the concept of that event. And third, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, the Athens office. Also, our gratitude goes to the mayor of Athens, Kostas Bakoyannis. The Athens Security Forum is under the auspices of the city of Athens, and we are grateful for that. And without further ado, back to you, Vasilis.
Well, thank you, Professor, for these introductory remarks. It's really important to know what you are embarking, actually. The title is NATO Strategic Concept of the New Challenges for International Security, and I guess that when you started planning all those events, no one knew that we would have a war in hand. Of course, I guess that this, of course, somehow changes the priorities within the alliance, and I would like to have a comment on that from the National Security Advisor, Mr. Dokos, who of course will present his analysis on what is happening right now and how NATO may reshape itself probably because of this crisis in its borders.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be in such a panel with friends and colleagues, and a very topical issue, unfortunately. But even if Russia or if Ukraine hadn't happened, there would still be a full agenda for NATO to discuss, debate, and decide upon with the new strategic concept. But of course, now Ukraine will dominate the discussion. One of the issues has always been the balance between the eastern flank and the southern flank. And you can imagine which is of more interest for a country like Greece. I think this will change. Hopefully not be overturned completely, but this will change. Now the emphasis will be on the eastern flank. The big question is, shall we change our policy towards Russia, which has been the so-called dual track approach? Deterrence on the one hand, open channels of communication and an effort to find a working relationship with Russia on the other. And of course, as always, the secret for success is in the mix of ingredients. Now, it seems to me that we'll also have to think about the day after. Russia will still be there after the end of the Ukraine conflict. We'll need to think of how or whether it is possible to establish some kind of working relationship. The dual track approach will have to remain our policy. Of course, deterrence will be for the foreseeable future more important than outreach and engaging Russia, but that element will have to stay on the table. Now, of course, another problem for NATO has always been the different threat perceptions of the members. As the old saying goes, where you stand depends on where you sit. So obviously, the further away you are from a hot zone, be that Russia or the Mediterranean, when it comes to population flows or terrorism, the different countries have different perceptions. We'll have to find a common denominator. That will be one of the major challenges in the weeks ahead till the Madrid summit. How we'll manage the problem of Russia? Well, I'm always the optimistic person. Russia has, I think, miscalculated in Ukraine. The cost will be high for all sides involved, for Ukraine itself, first of all, but for Russia as well, and for the European countries. So we need to find a way to end this conflict and then start thinking about the future. But it takes two to tango. The door of NATO and the EU on that matter has always been open for a reasonable Russia. I think despite the difficulties, it will remain open, but of course, Russia will have to prove with deeds, not just words, that it is interested. So that will be, I think, the main topic in the discussion in the NATO summit on Thursday, and that will dominate all discussions in NATO, but also in the EU, at least till the Madrid summit next June.
Well, thank you, Mr. Dokos, for that, for those remarks. I think that you have prepared the floor for Ms. Berti, which certainly has a lot of things to say about what's going to happen in the coming months. I would add to what the National Security Advisor said. I would only add a question on what are we going to do, what is going to happen with all these texts that have been prepared in the previous months and actually years, and the NATO Strategic Concept to 2030 does of course, NATO was initially created to counter, of course, the Soviet Union, and but maybe right now what was prepared until now was obsolete and has to be somehow renewed. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's of course a very important question. I will start just by giving you a quick background of where we are with this process, because of course the allies had already decided last time our heads of state and government met. So in June 2021, they came here to Brussels and they decided that it was time to update our strategy. And that is the strategic concept. The strategic concept is basically the greatest expression, if you wish, of alliance grand strategy, and it is a guiding document. It reflects NATO's adaptation. It charts the future course of the alliance in terms of shaping its military, its political adaptation. And since the end of the Cold War, these documents have also been public, which means they have helped us to explain what NATO is for, what NATO is about to our public, and to engage with our partners, but also to signal to potential adversaries. So this document is quite central to the alliance. And already in June, it had been decided that it was really time to update our strategy. Our strategic concept, because the last time we went through this exercise, it was 2010. So I think it's not a big surprise if I tell you the world had already changed quite dramatically, even before Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. So we already had a process ongoing to reflect these changes. And I think I completely share the framework that was just presented, meaning our starting point is that our security environment is very, very different from the one we saw in 2010. In 2010, we said the Euro-Atlantic area is at peace. The risk of conflict for our countries is very low. We're going to use force mostly in out-of-area operations. And of course, we were thinking Afghanistan. So it was a really different description of the world. Over the last few years, and especially since 2014, we've really been saying something quite different. We've been saying, well, first of all, there is a pattern of destabilizing behavior from the Russian Federation, and now we see its culmination with this horrific and unjustified and unprovoked war. But we also see that more broadly, we are in a more complex security environment. We are faced with more strategic competition across domains, military, but also political, technological, economic. And we also have to contend with more sophisticated and more widespread cyber threats, hybrid threats. We face pervasive instability in our neighborhood, and that's also something that continues to be incredibly important to our security and to that of our citizens. So in other words, our security environment was already incredibly different before this war of aggression started. But I think if you look at the next few months, I think allies will have to sit around the table and really ask hard questions about what is our future relationship with Russia, ask hard questions about how do we want to strengthen our ability to deter and defend. And these are some of the questions that were just mentioned. But of course, in the background, I think that it's also worth remembering that as an alliance, we really have had, in my view, one key task, right? Since we were created in 1949, that is to ensure the defense and security of our allies. And of course, to do that throughout the decades, we've had to evolve and adapt. Today, I think that it's important to say that to do that, to ensure the defense, the security of our allies, we do need to invest in our deterrence and defense. It's a present, the present situation makes it very clear. But of course, at the same time, we don't have the luxury to really deal only with one theater or only with one threat. We also need to continue to be able to respond to crises if they affect our security, and we need to be able to invest in fighting terrorism, and we have to be able to remain engaged and boost cooperation with our partners. So I think what you're seeing really is an alliance that is the expression we use as NATO is 360, but the reality is we need, in order to remain at peace and secure and do that for our allies, we cannot afford to focus on only one threat. But at the same time, and I'll stop here, and you're absolutely right, it is clear that the current war of aggression against Ukraine is the gravest security crisis since the end of the Second World War. So we will have to reflect on it. We will have to understand how that affects our security, the Euro-Atlantic peace and stability, and of course we will have to keep in the background the longer term impact on geopolitical competition as well. So it will be an important question, but the alliance will continue to perform all of its tasks, because that's what's required.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Berti. Now I'll go to our discussants. I should say here that even though the Ambassador Ioannis Alexios Zepos was announced, but something of extraordinary nature kept him unfortunately away, so he won't be attending the event. But we will continue our discussion with Evangelos Apostolakis, former Minister of Defense and also former Chief of Staff, and with a very long career in the Hellenic Navy from all positions of the branch. So, Mr. Apostolakis, my question for you, first of all, I'd like a general comment on what's happening right now because of the crisis in NATO, but also I would like to, if you could present us some of the major the concerns that Greece usually has when it comes to NATO priorities, and if you believe that this reorientation to the eastern flank would somehow move the attention away from the south that was quite had some challenges to tackle in the last 5-6 years.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Neros. I would like to thank you for this invitation first and the opportunity to discuss a so important subject. Unfortunately, so we all of us feel so deeply, unfortunately, not so well about this war. But anyway, we have to start from the beginning, starting from the situation as it is at the moment, and shows that everybody understands how important is the role of the NATO, and also how important is to establish a strategic and a way of the NATO working in case of be effective in any kind of these threats that we have in the area. So Greece, of course, is very important for the NATO, especially in this area. And as you know, the Souda Bay and Alexandroupolis are the very, very important issue for the NATO future operations and for the advances that provides in the area for the allies. I would like to notice some things at the moment, and especially the role of the NATO among all the allies, and especially to the allies in the European Union, because we believe in NATO, we support NATO, we provide all the armed forces that are necessary, and we have all the Europe have left the security and the defense in the NATO heads. So the cooperation has to be more improved, and everybody has to believe in the role of the NATO at the moment. European Union has started to think a little bit different, and after this war, he started thinking that he has to be also available to defend himself from this kind of threats, and also to be able to do something as a European Union. There are a lot of plans, there are a lot of declarations, and especially there is a sequence of actions that the European Union wants to do in the future, cooperated with the NATO. But this is plans, and we have to see all this. At the moment, I have to agree with Professor Dokos that we have to see the future, and we have to find the ways to stop this war that it has started at the moment. Also to hold the lines of communication open between the NATO and the Russia, between the European Union and the Russia, between the United States and the Russia also. Russia has to start be thinking that we have to put it in the architecture of defense, of security of the European Union also. They have to play a significant role. The situation is very, very complicated at the moment, but we have to start thinking about the future also. The war has started. We don't know how this war is going to be finished, but we are going to also to face a lot of cases difficult in the future. That's why we have to start thinking about new strategic in NATO and the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Apostolakis. We already have some questions. I'm going to convey them to the speakers right afterward. I get a comment from Professor Ifandis. I'd like to what Mr. Apostolakis said. I would like to add a question that I always find that the answers are not adequate, and of course, how could we know if we're not in the decision-making tables? One is that why, and it is relevant, of course, to how NATO allies trust each other. We saw in the previous months before the Russian invasion that the Europeans actually were in complete disbelief of the US intelligence about an invasion pending to happen. So that's the first thing. And the second one is soon we're going to have consequences in Europe that are connected, of course, with the economy, how the energy prices influence everything in the supply chain, and maybe this will be an impediment for further more decisive steps to tackle Russian aggression. So that's a question that I would like to hear your opinion on, Mr. Ifandis. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go take a step back and refer to your initial remark, Vasilis, about what has happened since February the 24th has affected our planning here. Okay, when we started, and you're right, when we started planning, when we started thinking about the Athens Security Forum and the first event, we mostly thought that this is a great opportunity to reflect, first of all, on 70 years of membership, to reflect on NATO's very successful records, despite the occasional, if you like, shortcomings, to reflect on the ups and downs, the good occurrences, the grievances, the dark but much more predictable days of the Cold War, and the if you like, the more optimistic but more uncertain at the same time post-Cold War days. So we thought that we could talk about more traditional and less conventional threats and challenges. Certainly, Russia was not at the top of our menu, and we thought that we will be discussing the problems of unity and coherence in the transatlantic community. And now all this sounds so out of date within a few weeks. And you are absolutely right that Russia's unprovoked assault on Ukraine came as a surprise to Europeans, but did not come as a surprise and should have not come as a surprise after American warnings. Nevertheless, the most important point is that the Western allies failed to deter Russia, failed to prevent Russia's onslaughts. Once the allies, ruled out any direct military assistance to Ukraine, once we ruled out boots on the ground, then deterring a Moscow bent on controlling its neighbors, bent on appending the post-1990 European Security Order, was always going to be a tall order with grave consequences. So sanctions, military assistance to Ukraine, and being up NATO did not work, in a sense, did not fail to dissuade Russia from invading. Now the discussion is about the what we need to do, or what are our options from now on. And I think there is a great consensus in both sides of the Atlantic that the West needs to embark on a strategy of containment that increases the cost to Russia, and eventually, down the road, forces a change in Russia's strategy. Okay, the outlines of this, how can I put it, of this playbook, okay, are familiar already. Discussion about Cannon and the 40s, has resurfaced, and it's a very useful guideline, if you like. What Cannon argued back then was that the Soviet regime and its insecurities represented a clear danger to the West, and he called for a steady and a forceful counter pressure. So what we are discussing, even if we don't admit it, what is being discussed within NATO, what was discussed yesterday in the extraordinary meeting of the European Union, is the how and how fast actually we can revisit a robust policy of containment, and there is consensus that this is now the West's best option. Of course, we need to adapt this new strategy or of containment to the realities as they exist today, because these are not. It's not the same as at the end of the World War II. We need to take account of the role of China and the extent to which Russia's ties to Russia can act as a bulwark against the West, or whether China's support has limits, which I believe it has, limits as to how far Beijing can go to support Moscow. We need to craft a strategy, always remembering that Russia is not the Soviet Union. It is not in military or in ideological terms, and it's by no means close to what the West can muster as capabilities, both soft and hard. But we need a strategy with very strong pillars. And let me conclude by saying that an effective update of containments, if we move toward that direction, should consist of at least 4 pillars, 2 positive, 2, if you like, in inverted commas, negative. The positive ones is maintaining the US military strength and upgrading European capabilities. And we are already, there is already a consensus forming in Europe on that. Second, the second positive pillar is shaping, crafting a much more robust transatlantic community that can accommodate and that can, if you like, can feed into the need for more European strategic autonomy. And the 2 negative towards Russia, I mean, pillars is decoupling Western economies from Russia, reducing Western dependency on Russia energy sources. And this is not a new debate. It's an old debate going back to the early 80s. And the 4th pillar, which is the more short-termist of all, is isolating Moscow in the international institutions that can help delegitimize what Russia has done. I think together these 4 elements will steadily increase the cost to Russia of continuing its policies. A final word on the economic consequences. It is not so much a matter of whether we can suffer the consequences, whether we can talk. I think we have, and we will discover that we have much more resilience, political resilience, and economic resilience in the face of what is going on before us. Already, the news from Brussels are quite encouraging. For next year, the preliminary decision of the European Union to approach the energy market as a unit is a major step towards facing off the very grave economic consequences of the war. But at the end of the day, the West represents a $40 trillion economy, and this is beyond its military might, and this is something that we can operationalize if there is political will, and there is nothing that we cannot deal with in an effective and robust way.
Well, thank you, Professor. I'll start by conveying some of the question. I'll start with Ms. Berti here, which has already seen, of course, the question, but I will read it. It is talking about the deployment of some naval assets of NATO in the Indo-Pacific, helping the US to shoulder the burden of collective security. It has some examples there. And the question actually is, what are some other practical steps that the alliance can take both in the short term and in the long term to enhance deterrence in the Asia Pacific and implement its planned pivot towards that region? Are any of these steps related to the fields of cybersecurity? Ms. Berti?
Thank you very much. And I will just, before I will get to this excellent question, which is indeed very important. But before I do that, maybe I can just take 30 seconds to add a couple of words about the current NATO response to Russia's aggression against Ukraine, because of course that is very much on the minds of I think the people who are listening to us this afternoon. And I just wanted very briefly to add a couple of elements to what has been said in terms of just reassuring two main points, of course. First of all, agreeing with the point that has been made that we have been, as the transatlantic community, incredibly united since the beginning of this crisis. We have responded with speed, we have responded with unity and with resolve. On the one hand, that means that I think it's been made absolutely clear that NATO will defend every inch of allied territory. But this is not just words, of course. If you look at what the alliance has done since 2014, you see really the greatest reinforcement of our collective defense in a generation. And since 24th of February, allies have taken really consequential decision at the speed of relevance. We have activated defense plans to shield our alliance. We have increased the readiness of our forces. We have forward deployed our forces. There are now hundreds of thousands of forces on heightened alert, around 40,000 troops that are under NATO command, mostly, of course, in the eastern part of the alliance to shield allies and prevent a spillover of this horrific war. All of this is backed by naval power, or that is backed by air defense. So just to say that is not when I talked about the writing a new strategic concept, which is incredibly important. I just don't want to give the impression that that means that we have no plans or we have not taken measure to respond to the current crisis. To the contrary, I think what you have seen over the past weeks is deliberate, measured and responsible steps to ensure that we really are able to defend and deter our allies. And at the same time, we have also NATO allies have also made it clear that they stand and we stand as NATO with Ukraine, not just by paying tribute to their courage and to the sacrifices of the Ukrainian armed forces and people, but also significantly NATO allies have been standing together in imposing costs to Russia through sanctions, through pushing for their diplomatic isolation, but also NATO allies are of course also providing important assistance to support Ukraine's right to self-defense. That is done by the NATO allies, and NATO itself has a role in coordinating humanitarian assistance. So this is just to say that we are very much responding to this crisis. We can talk later about whether there are more questions about what additional steps we can take. But just to make it clear, I think that's important also to reassure those that are listening to us that we are absolutely devoting all our efforts to responding. Now I shift to the Asia Pacific very quickly. That's of course an important question. I believe that in the next strategic concept, the NATO allies, the 30 NATO allies, will want to discuss how the global balance of power is shifting. They will want to discuss the rise of China and its impact on Euro-Atlantic security. And here, of course, the starting point is that NATO as an alliance had not worked on issues related to China's rise for the majority of its existence. But it did start addressing the opportunities and challenges related to the rise of China since 2019. Since then, quite a bit of work has been done, and I believe that debate will be reflected in the strategic concept, because even if NATO is and remains an alliance for its allies, which are Europe and North America.
Yes, I think we have a problem with the connection. Until we have Miss Berti again online, I think she has a problem with her connection. I really want to convey a question on for the Greek speakers. Actually, we're only Greek speakers right now left on the online. About how do you, Miss Berti, do we have you live now? Can we hear you? Well, until Miss Berti is back online, I'm just going to ask on how do you believe that Greece can contribute to further enhance the deterrence efforts currently undertaken by NATO? I think that Mr. Dokos is much more used to us to answer to this question, since he is the national security advisor. We of course have already read about the help that Greece has provided Ukraine, but I'd like to ask on how we could further help. That's the question that is being made by someone that watches us here. Thank you.
Well, let me say that Greece already has a significant military footprint in operations by NATO and the EU. It is a participant to the UNIFIL mission in Lebanon and the UN, IRINI in Libya. We are patrolling the airspace of North Macedonia. We are, in addition to the assistance you mentioned, which has been both in the forms of weapons but also humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, Greece is offering extensive facilities in both in Suda Bay, in Alexandroupolis, and elsewhere. And we are part of the NATO Rapid Reaction Force. So when asked, we'll do our best. You know, I hope we would be able to do more, but as you know, we have our more permanent problems here in this part of NATO. So this is more or less what Greece can offer, and I think it's not insignificant.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dokos. So, since we have again the pleasure of having Ms. Berti again online, if you please can conclude where you left from. It was your finalizing remark on the Indo-Pacific security.
Absolutely. Apologies for that. Sometimes connection troubles, but yeah, no. Point is that as an alliance, we need to look we need to take a close look at the security implication for our security, for our defense on the Euro-Atlantic area, connected to China's increased assertiveness on the world stage and China's rise, and we will do that. In terms of Asia-Pacific, I think there's different. It's a complex question that I don't, and there's not much time, so I'll just very quickly say a few things. And one of them is, of course, it relates to a point I made earlier, which is NATO has been for the past 3 decades also investing heavily in its partnership, and it's now an alliance with over 37 partners, and we work with them to really address shared security challenges. And we all know that we have partners in our near neighborhood, from Sweden and Finland to Jordan or Tunisia, but we also have global partners, including Australia, New Zealand, Korea, and Japan, with whom we work on issues that are of shared interest, on shared security challenges, from hybrid threats to cyber attacks. So we are working very closely because, of course, we know that, yes, we are an alliance for Europe and North America, but the threats and challenges we face are truly global and interconnected. So to respond to them, we have to work with our partners and reach out. And of course, that includes our partners in the Asia Pacific. There's much more to say, but in the interest of time, I'll stop there. It was a very good question.
Well, allow me to ask you a follow-up question. Mr. Dokos actually answered part of it. I would like you to ask if you believe that how Greece, can further assist in ways that enhance its own strategic interests, as well as NATO's, because sometimes these two are taken by by some people as contradictory. This is why I'm asking you as a NATO representative in our discussion.
So, well, I need to think about it a little bit, because in my mind, and you will correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see that much of a contradiction, in the sense that, to me, Europe and North America, the transatlantic community, we stand together. We face the same strategic challenges. We have the same threats. We face destabilization, terrorism, fragility in our neighborhood. And of course, we are always able to tackle them better when we work together. So to me, by working in NATO, and that's very much what Greece does as an important and valued ally, it is also enhancing its own security. So to me, it is really a force multiplier being part of this alliance. In terms of what I think, there's so much that Greece as an alliance, as an ally, is already doing, as Thanos mentioned. So, but I think it's incredibly important to have the expertise, the perspective when it comes to dealing with the challenges from our southern neighborhood, when it comes to tackling issues related to maritime security. In other words, there's really a lot that Greece contributes on a daily basis when it comes to NATO. I'll stop here, but I could go on with a long list.
Of course, it's a very long discussion. We could be having it for hours. Now I'll have to move. There is a question for Mr. Apostolakis here about our friend here asks on what, if you can elaborate a little bit, what do you mean when you say new strategy? What exactly do you mean by that?
I don't think that anybody is satisfied with the way we act as at the moment as NATO or as a European Union related to the defense and security matters. First of all, we didn't succeed to avoid the war in Europe. This is okay. This is something that Russia starts, and we are disappointed, and we have to give all the blames to the Russians at the moment. But I believe that it was plenty of time to be prepared in case of avoiding this situation like this. That's why I'm thinking that we have to issue a new strategy related with the role of the NATO and the European Union and the cooperation, and also the way we act as partners in this organization. As you know, I have participated in many meetings inside the NATO, and the problems we face in the most of the cases that we don't give the same priorities to the problems we have in the NATO. Every alliance has its own way in the most of the cases. Okay, the decisions are common, but there are a lot of difficulties. So we have to start thinking from the beginning how we can be more effective and how we are going to create our participation and our in NATO, and what is the role of each one of us in this participation. Always there is a way to be more effective and having better results. This is what I mean when I say that we need a new strategy.
On this, I'd like to go to Mr. Dokos and ask him, of course, on the discussion, of course, about the strategic concept that just, before the war, there was that very, I would say, general outlining of what the discussion is about. It was about, values, reinforcement of military power, civil society. I would say that there was a rather abstract discussion on where NATO is going, and maybe that was, because of a lack of orientation. We had a lot of texts written about China being an adversary, but Russia not so much. So, how do you believe that this discussion can be relevant again? and actually be and this discussion to be concluded before the Madrid summit?
Well, thank you for the question, because it allows me to put the discussion into a broader perspective. Just before the Russian attack against Ukraine, the discussion about the strategic concept revolved around roughly 8 key topics, which of course included Russia, but also China, terrorism, emerging and disruptive technologies, and so on and so forth. And I think, NATO needs to continue discussing those questions, because as I mentioned in my earlier comments, there will be a day after, and as Benedetta mentioned, NATO needs adopts a strategic concept every 10 or 11 years, meaning that this document will provide guidance for NATO for the next several years. So it's important to cover a broad range of issues. And I, just to pick on some of them and make very brief remarks. First of all, and this is an old discussion inside NATO, there's always the risk of being a jack of all trades but master of none. So NATO needs to decide what it can do as a primary actor, what it can do as a contributing actor, and what things NATO cannot do and should not waste any scarce resources. So that's always a challenge for any institution. Then there is the very important question of cooperation with the European Union. In my opinion, and of course I could be wrong, but let me say it anyway, this is now, especially after Ukraine, an irreversible trend. The EU will move towards some kind of strategic autonomy. And I think it's crucial that we ensure that this will be complementary to NATO, not competitive. Avoid duplication at all costs. And I think this is something that can benefit both institutions, both NATO and the EU. And we need to work on that. Of course, there's always the question of China. China as a Janus situation, a systemic challenger on the one hand, a trade partner on the other. We need to form and adapt a strategy. Of course, that also begs the question, which is connected to the previous question to Benedetta. Is NATO, because of geography, a key player on that question in the Asia-Pacific? Of course, you have territories, you have a military presence, but one has to decide if NATO, if that will be a key theater for NATO in the future. Then strategic partnerships. NATO is good at forming such partnerships, and we think it would be beneficial if we can work with local allies that know their regions better than we do. So you have a number of institutional formats for cooperation, like the Mediterranean Initiative, the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, and you also have all kind of strong links with countries like Australia, Japan, India will be a priority in the years ahead. So we need to decide on partnerships as well. And of course, the important question of emerging and disrupting technologies, including cyber and the whole question of artificial intelligence, life sciences, unmanned vehicles, nanotechnology. The list is long. And there will be certainly challenges, not only for our security, but also for our way of life. So these are some, and let me add also the need to regulate and protect, in some cases, the so-called global commons, the high seas, space, internet. Those will be important challenges for NATO. And on top of all of that, let me also emphasize one of my previous comments. There was in Europe until recently a quite sophisticated security architecture, a number of arms control treaties, confidence building measures, and we Europeans were quite proud of it. And we try to also suggest that this could be a model for other troubled regions in the world. Now, the whole thing has collapsed. We could have an interesting question about responsibilities, not all of them in one direction, but most of the blame in one direction. But the important question is, okay, when this will be over, one way or the other, how shall we try to rebuild it if we can? So those will be key questions for the alliance, and they have been under discussion for some time now. There's still roughly 3 months till Madrid. Benedetta and her colleagues will be working very hard on some of those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dokos. I don't want to wrong anyone, so I'm going to convey here a question for Professor Ifadis, which I find a little bit provocative. You have spoken about new containment in NATO, and since NATO has does NATO has to change its founding charter for that, and does to change its posture from offensive to aggressive? That's the question. And why do you believe that the West failed to deter President Putin? Thank you.
Well, let me start by reiterating what has already been said, because it is important to remember. It is very important to grasp what we are talking about. And we're talking about an institution, NATO, which is contrary to perception in some countries anyway. It is a very dynamic and very adaptive institution. Okay, as Dr. Dokos said, every 10 years there is, as soon as we adapt, as we agree on a strategic concept, we start talking about a new one. Okay, and this is a sign, a very powerful sign of someone, of an institution, sort of restless in a very positive manner. From the Harmel report to the current strategic concept of 2010, which was about what? Collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. These were the basic sort of concepts, the basic tools that we agreed upon as transatlantic allies to deal with. So NATO is dynamic, and the second truth, if you like, confirmed, celebrated by recent events, is that NATO is relevant. Okay, without a doubt, as we speak, top of the agenda is adapting the alliance to the new normal, okay, in European security. The new normal, which is the product of Russian sort of a violent revisionism. So, and what I meant by containment is nothing very sophisticated. You don't need to be strategically smart to discuss these things. Actually, it's digging in our transatlantic strategic past. Okay, part of NATO's adaptation should, and I'm sure is, including an uncompromising re-embrace of territorial defense, and this is the core of containment. Territorial defense. Okay, I'm thinking, and I should say that to some degree, the alliance has been re-embracing territorial defense since 2014, when Russia first invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea. So 2014 actually prompted, first of all, the process towards a new strategic concept, but it also prompted a dramatic reappraisal of the alliance's ways and means. Even within the financial crisis, we had defense spending growing across the alliance after having declined for nearly a quarter of a century. Equipment modernization was given a kickstart through these budgetary increases, and in some cases, allies even expanded their military manpower. And also, we upgraded what we used to call, or not used to call, what was more or less left to policy experts, readiness. Readiness became a very fashionable, the talk of the town, if you like, in NATO, and not only in NATO. So NATO expanded its exercises, it rejuvenated its rapid response forces, or at least embarked upon a process of doing it. The alliance deployed 1,200 person multinational battle groups among the 3 Baltic states and Poland on a permanent basis. Okay, the number is small, but it is a deterrent signal, and the purpose was to act as a kind of tripwire should Moscow attack. So I think the process of containing a more assertive Russia had already started, but now things acquire a sense of urgency, and we can see that not only in NATO. There is a snap meeting coming up, and these things would be discussed, and a rumor circulating that the adaptation of the new strategic concept might not wait until Madrid in the summer, but it doesn't matter that much. This is what we mean by containment, by revisiting all dogmas. And I know here I'm stepping into Admiral Apostolakis' backyard. He is much more capable to speak on these issues with more authority. But basically, this is what we are talking about: re-embracing territorial defense, beefing up capabilities to meet the scale of the new Russian threats, because that's the perception. It doesn't matter if it is real or not, but that's a very strong perception that Russia represents a threat. So the goal for NATO is to stop and repel any thought of Russian attack into Allied territory. Now, as far as the first question, and I will be very brief, it's disbelief. No one expected that Moscow would be that in Moscow there will be such an absence of strategic logic. No one can reasonably explain what Moscow has done. It doesn't make sense economically, diplomatically, militarily, by any measure. It's the decision to invade Ukraine and brutalize Ukraine it defies strategic rationale.
Thank you, Mr. Ifadis. I would say that we maybe start to wrap up our discussion. So I'll go as we started. I will ask a comment from Mr. Dokos. Of course, he may make his concluding remarks, but I would like to also ask if it is realistic to have any discourse, any discussion about the next steps of enlargement of NATO in the context we are living today, actually.
Easy question. No, I think enlargement will not be a priority for NATO in the immediate future. And let me stop at this on that question. But concluding remarks. I think there's a few tasks ahead. First of all, end the fighting and give room to diplomacy. Then we have a responsibility to rebuild Ukraine. And hopefully the damage will not be even more extensive than it already is. And at the same time, as we will be strengthening our deterrence capabilities, we also need to continue sending strong signals to all interested parties that revisionism will not be tolerated. And this should go to all directions. Then at the same time, I think beyond NATO, the EU needs to do its homework. We need to promote strategic autonomy. We need to reduce, I will not say eliminate, because one has to be realistic. We have to reduce energy dependence on Russia, but also dependence on raw materials, foodstuff, not only vis-a-vis Russia. And this is, I think, one of the lessons of the pandemic is that there are limits to globalization, and the global supply chain is a fragile network, and we need more resilience. Maybe we need to not only to strengthen our national capabilities wherever possible, but also to think more in terms of more regional supply chains, less global ones. And then I apologize if I'm insisting on a message, but all wars end at some point. We'll have to think about the day after our relationship with Russia. And then hopefully, well, it should be clear that there will be consequences for what happened, and there will be a price to pay. But of course, we need to think about the day after. Hopefully, Russia will not do anything that will make fence mending even more difficult than it already is. And there are a few, there's some speculation or some scenarios. I hope they stay just that, scenarios. But the day after will be very difficult for all of us. It's perhaps too soon to say whether this has been yet another defining moment in history, and how different the world will be after Ukraine. Probably too early for that, but we have several difficult tasks ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Dokos. I'd like to move to Ms. Berti and ask for her concluding remarks, adding a small question from me and how NATO can somehow, formulate a kind of a foresight mechanism to somehow put together all the priorities of the member states, because not all member states have the same priorities, as you already know.
Thank you. So I'll integrate the concluding remarks and answer your questions for the sake of brevity. No, so that's a very good question, and I would say I would say that over the next few months, with this process of writing the strategic concept, we really have a very important opportunity. This is not just a paper. It is about 30 allies. First and foremost, it's about the process. It's about 30 allies sitting at the table, coming to a convergence of views, taking into account each other's interests and perspectives, but really finding a common vision of our strategic environment, of our threats, of our challenges, of our priorities. So it's very, very important. And I think we have talked over the last hour about how NATO's been able to adapt and how the new concept will reflect its need to strengthen deterrence and defense, to embrace emerging and disruptive technologies, to mitigate and adapt to the security impact of climate change. So we really have been quite broad. But I would also say that our concept will also be an important opportunity for us to stress the elements of continuity in NATO. And there's been many over the past 7 decades. Fundamentally, our need to stand together, the importance of the transatlantic bond, and the centrality to ensure security and defense. And the fact that we are not just an alliance, we are a political military alliance that first and foremost is based on common values. And I think here I also echo what Thanos was mentioning. It is an opportunity for us to reiterate that our alliance is based on shared values, democracy, rule of law, individual freedom, but also about a shared vision of what we would like lasting and sustainable peace in the European Atlantic area to look like. And that's about territorial integrity, political independence, the freedom and the right of each country to freely choose their alliances and how to conduct their foreign policy. And that's one of the many reasons why this brutal war in Ukraine has shattered peace in Europe, but also undermined our security order. So I think these are all, there will be very important opportunities to reiterate these messages in our strategic concept. And of course, there's always, and I'll conclude with this, there's always the need to look ahead. When we use our strategic concept, we try to also look into the future. We don't predict, but we want to plan and prepare. And that's really also what foresight is about. And of course, where I'm sitting in the policy, looking at policy planning, we really always try to integrate foresight, horizon scanning. This is also another element, going back to the question about all the many great contribution of Greece to the alliance. Greece is also assisting us with experts that have joined and worked at the headquarters on issues related to foresight, policy planning. So that's certainly an issue that we'll continue to invest in going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Berti. Mr. Apostolakis, I would like some last few words from you, and I would also like to ask you if you believe that this war, this conflict in the heart of Europe will somehow aid NATO in its maturity in the 21st century, if I may say.
Anyway, we show the significant and as I said in the beginning of my speech, how important is to work the NATO allies in the same concept and following the same political, let's say, way. We face and we live something that concerning on the logic way, nobody was believing that is going to be happen. So this war, we all of us understood that changed completely the things that we were thinking, the way we were thinking so far. So starts to be and to believe that everything is possible finally. So we have to think about all the possibilities to be happening in the future. So at the moment, I believe that we have to be more cool and think about any kind of our reaction, about of any action we are doing, and also about the sanctions we are always talking and taking, because we are suffering more than probably the others we are putting the sanctions on. So is a good opportunity to start thinking from the beginning and put everything in a base, in a new base, to respond probably better and more effective in any kind that is coming in the future. So as Mr. Dokos says, that is the next day. The war is going to be over. So we have to face the world again and see how we can survive and how we can continue. So everything has to be in our mind, looking also the future, not only the present and what we are facing at the moment. So I believe that all the European Union and the NATO, as I said in the beginning, is something we have to think how to be more effective and looking the future on a better way, also preventing actions like the one we face at the moment. This is, I cannot say anything. I cannot predict anything at the moment.
Of course, Mr. Apostolakis, thank you very much. Now, Mr. Ifantis, you are the host actually, so you should be having the right to close the discussion. From my side, I'd like to add something to something that Mr. Apostolakis actually already implied, that of course NATO is facing challenges. It's getting itself ready for the future, as Ms. Berti said, through those collective mechanisms within NATO. But what we've seen until now are threats and crises out of the borders of the member states. It's not problems. It's not wars. It's not conflicts. They're not issues that could somehow generate the Article 5 collective defense clause. Do you believe that Russia could, Putin actually, to be more precise, could try and challenge this?
Well, I will be very brief. I think there is already a challenge launched on what we perceive as a European security order, as it was shaped, and if you like, sort of after the end of the Cold War. Now, what we have in our hands, it's a war that we never thought could happen in Europe. I know the counter arguments that Balkans in the 90s, but it was a civil war. We didn't have an invading country brutalizing another one, changing borders in such a fashion, and this is the thing that we need time to process as citizens. Okay, not as policymakers. Policymakers do not have that luxury, but as citizens, we need some time to process that in Europe, 2022 we are dealing with a situation that we thought was a thing of the past, and this is what makes very hard to explain what Moscow has done. I know that, again, the argumentation that it was the NATO expansion, but I think Mrs. Berti has already addressed that. Who could refuse Poland, okay, or Hungary? Who could refuse Poland of Copernicus and Chopin? The membership in European and transatlantic institutions, part of European civilization and culture. So, which is, but I won't go beyond that. The fact of life is that we need to prepare for every contingency. Okay, this is how the future, at least in the medium term, would look like. I hope that not very far into the distant future, there will be a day when we can again engage in full trust with Russia, and we can return to a state of play that is conducive to peace and stability in Europe and the world. But let me express the Institute's deep gratitude to Mrs. Berti, to Minister Apostolakis, and to National Security Advisor Thanos Dokos for honoring us, for honoring our inaugural Athens Security Forum event, and let me extend an invitation for the live event in September, and more so in 2023. Thank you ever so much.
Well, thank you for your remarks, Mr. Ifandis. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the inaugural event of the Athens Strategic Forum, titled "The New NATO Strategic Concept and the New Challenges for International Security." As it was expected, the discussion had a heavy influence from the conflict, from the devastating war in Ukraine. I myself thank, of course, the organizers for honoring me to moderate this discussion, and I really hope that next time it will not be virtual, but it will be in person. Thank you very much. You have a good evening. Mr. Ifandis wants to say something, so please.
Rendezvous in a month's time for the second event.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation also.
Yeah.
Good evening to all of you. Καληνύχτα.